I'm currently a 20-year-old gay male living in Iowa. I am a bigger set guy, but I have always struggled with depression and social phobia. This meant I didn't make friends very easily, and when I did make a friend, I was admittedly pretty clingy about them. By the time I got to college, this had mostly cleared up, but I still had some issues with it. Hopefully this will help explain some of my actions in this story. My first year of college, I decided to go the opposite end of the state from where I grew up. I wanted to feel independent, and I thought the distance would help force me to break out of my shell some. I was very wrong. I immediately became even more depressed than I already was, and it only took about 2 weeks of living there to start having suicidal thoughts. It didn't help any that the guy who I'd been talking to and becoming friends with throughout the summer, and was supposed to be living within the dorms, ended up not going to college, leaving me all alone in my dorm room. That is when I met Josh. Josh was another freshman on my floor, and after a brief conversation, I discovered he was bisexual. I immediately became attached to him, as I had no other friends at the time, and I felt like we had a lot in common. Before you ask, no, we never had sex. He wasn't really my type, and I didn't want to ruin a friendship with sex. Anyways, we became friends rather quickly, and about a month into college, Josh asked me if I wanted to move into a different dorm room and building with him, as neither of us could afford to have a single room. And he said he knew people in this other building that we could hang out with and not feel so secluded. Being a little naive, I agreed, and within a week, we had packed up and moved all our stuff into a different building. I didn't start having issues with Josh right away, but after a week or two, I started noticing some things that made me uncomfortable. I noticed numerous times that my movies and DVDs had been moved around and sometimes even left out in the room without their cases. I'm really protective of my DVD collection, and I wasn't alright with him using them without asking. I tried to bring this up with him, and he said he would stop, but he never did. I also noticed that I was being sexiled, as it's called many times. Usually about once a week I would be forced to leave my room for hours on end. Normally I wouldn't really have cared, as I have no problem sitting in the dorm lounge until he got done. But he always chose to do it fairly late at night, sometimes even after I went to bed. I am not a night person, and most of my classes were earlier in the morning, so I really got upset about this, and I did bring it up to him again. He said he would stop, but he never did. There were a couple of other things that I didn't really think much of at the time, that now I am not so sure how innocent they were. For instance, I had to buy underwear about 3 times in the first few months that I was living with him. I didn't think much of it, as I knew that college laundry rooms are notorious for having things stolen. But looking back, I'm not sure they even got that far. Also, I remember him having a real obsession with horror movies. At first, this was great, because I am a huge horror fan myself, but he preferred gore films, while I preferred the film to have a good story and atmosphere. He used to watch gory horror films like Saw and more all the time, and I vaguely remember waking up one night to see him touching himself while watching the remake of I Spit on Your Grave. At first I wrote it off as just him scratching his leg, but now I'm not so sure. Another issue that I had was that while he would kick me out of the room about once a week so he could have sex, I was never allowed. Every time I asked him, he just complained about having a lot of homework he needed to work on, and that he hated doing it anywhere but in his room. I tried to ignore it, but he also wouldn't even let me have some alone time to pleasure myself. Whenever I would get started, he would always seem to walk in the room and told me to keep going, and he would just ignore me and listen to music. But I don't think he ever did. Like I said, these were little things, but they started to get to me. So before Thanksgiving break, I decided to look for a new roommate. I ended up finding one, and had signed all the papers needed for me to switch rooms. But I had to wait until the end of the semester. This wasn't an issue with me, and I told Josh about this, and he seemed to take things just fine. Thanksgiving came and went. It was only about 4 days, but it was a much-needed escape from college, and it was nice to see my family again. When I got back, though, I found that my roommate hadn't left campus for break like he said he was going to. I also found that he had taken all my stuff, even the things in the closet and drawers, and had thrown them into a giant pile in the middle of the dorm room. He had even gone so far as to buy new clothes to put in my old closet, so that I didn't have room for my own. I complained to him, and reminded him that I wasn't moving out for another 3 weeks, but he simply said that he didn't care, that if I was going to leave, that he might as well help me a little bit. This wasn't the last straw, however, and I still stayed there for another week. That is, until he pushed me past my limits. My last night in that room, I had asked him if I could have the room to myself for a few hours, as I wanted to Skype with my long-distance boyfriend, and would prefer if it was in private. He didn't seem upset about it, and grabbed some homework and his laptop, and left the room. 2 hours later, about 10 p.m., I finished my Skype conversation and had texted him saying he could come back to the room anytime he wanted. I stayed up for 2 more hours browsing the internet, but he never came back to the room. I didn't think anything of it and simply went to bed. At about 2 or 3 in the morning, I was suddenly awoken up by the sound of death metal music blaring so loud in my room that my RA halfway down the hall was woken up by it, followed shortly by a really loud bang, as someone slammed my door shut. I got up and shut off the music, finding a CD of Josh's in his CD player, and at first didn't think much of it, until I saw he had left a note as well. Next time, don't treat your roommates like shit, or else you won't wake up at all. That was the last I could take. I had done nothing to him that would be considered treating him like shit, and I was terrified about the threat he had given me. I called campus security, and they came out and took my statement. But since Josh wasn't there and hadn't done anything illegal, they couldn't do anything. The officer just advised that I stay in a friend's room for the night, and that I move out of the room as soon as possible. I told my RA and the head of the dorm building the situation, and they gave me permission to start moving the next day. I didn't have any other issues with Josh after I left. But my story doesn't end here. About halfway through my next semester, I walked into the main lobby of the dorm building and saw Josh, with all of his stuff next to him. And he was talking to a couple of police officers. Not campus security guards, actual police officers. One of which never took his hand off his gun the entire time he was around Josh. At first I laughed, and figured he had gotten into some sort of trouble that I thought he deserved. That is, until I got brought into the dorm office the next day to talk to a couple of officers. They asked me a couple of questions about Josh, like, why did I stop living with him as my roommate? If I knew anything about him having used any kind of illegal substances, and if I ever knew him to be a violent individual. I told them everything I have told all of you, and that when we were living together he did smoke marijuana now and then. But I didn't really care, as I have no issue with people who smoke pot. I don't do it myself, mind you, but I also don't believe it should be an illegal substance. Anyways, I asked them why I was being questioned, and what they said made my heart drop into my stomach. Apparently Josh was into using a lot more than just weed. He, apparently, had started using cocaine, meth, and even some heroin at some point in his short college life. About a week ago, Josh had apparently used heroin and ended up severely attacking another student in one of his classes. He smashed his face with a heavy textbook, and apparently he also stabbed him with a pencil before running out of the class. When he got back to the dorm, he completely trashed the place. He ended up breaking his TV, his gaming systems, DVDs, CDs, even the college chairs, desks, and the windows, all of which belonged to the dorm building and not to him. He also took some more drugs and ended up overdosing, meaning he had to go to the hospital for an entire week until he was better. When he got out, he was banned from the campus, and the police were there to make sure he had gotten off of the premises before midnight, or else they were going to arrest him. Luckily, he didn't have a roommate when all of this happened, so no one else but the student from his class ended up getting hurt. Still, part of me wonders, what could have happened if I had still been his roommate and had been home during this incident? Would he have attacked me as well? Am I lucky to even be alive right now? I never saw or heard from Josh ever again, and I am beyond glad about this. I have since moved back to my hometown, and I'm going to school here, and I have yet to have any other major problems like this when it comes to college. But I still wonder, what could have happened if I hadn't gotten out of there when I had? So Josh, the roommate who made my first semester of college a living hell. Let's never meet again. 2. All I wanted was to use my coupon for free underwear from Victoria's Secret. This story starts out with a girl's day afternoon, 24 female, with my good friend Scarlett, back in December 2015. We both received coupons in the mail and it was finally time to use them. So we decided to get lunch and then head to the mall. Upon entering Victoria's Secret, I noticed a tall, heavy-set man pacing slowly in front of the doors. I figured he was probably just another guy, too embarrassed to shop with his girlfriend, sister, friend, mother, inside a store decorated with lace bras and half-naked models in underwear. After we each picked out a pair, we decided to just walk around the mall and go to one of the different shops. Mostly window shopping. Scarlett wanted to find a pair of earrings that were Christmas festive, so we headed to Claire's. For anyone who hasn't seen a Claire's in the mall, they're usually tiny and the entire store can be viewed from the outside given how large the windows are. We were looking at one of the first rotating racks when I noticed a man standing slightly behind me. A quick glance over my shoulder revealed that it was the same gentleman who was pacing back and forth in front of Victoria's Secret. He was not looking directly at me, so again, giving him the benefit of the doubt, figured that he likely followed his person to Claire's. However, I don't like tight spaces, so I casually move about a foot away from him. He shuffled closer. I scoot away again. He inched closer. Okay, weird. I look up. He towers over me a good 6'2", if not taller, wearing a hoodie that hangs loosely, covering most of his thighs and baggy jeans. I give a sort of nod and smile. Big mistake. We lock eyes. In my head, I can hear my friend saying, "Being nice causes accidents," and silent the cursor. I move again and bend down to look at the other jewelry. He shuffles towards me again, this time nearly on top of me. He then puts his hands under his hoodie and starts making only what I can describe as a fapping noise with his hand. I'm not sure what he was doing. Maybe he had an itch, but the motion clearly did not look like he was scratching his stomach. The whole time he was doing this, he stared at the rack with a weird grin and would occasionally look at me. I freeze, slowly put the jewelry back on the shelf, and straightened. Glancing at Scarlett, we make eye contact and nod to each other in mutual agreement, deciding to move across the store. He follows. At this point, I get close to Scarlett. Hey, is he freaking you out a bit? Yeah, okay. Let's move to the back of the store, closer to the cameras and employees. We move to the back and pretend to inspect the hairbands, pointing to which ones we like. The man proceeds to try to follow us back there, but the sales associate, thank God, steps in front of him. Sir, do you know them? No answer. Are they your friends? The man shakes his head. Sir, I think you should leave the store. He immediately turns around and walks out. We thought it was over. Nope. We stay in the back for a bit, nearly forgetting about the strange man. I looked towards the front of the store and stopped in my tracks. The man was standing, staring me down with his nose nearly touching the window. I cannot forget the look he had on his face. It was as if he were watching his prey. I honestly have not seen that kind of menace in someone's eyes before. It still gives me chills. I turn and face Scarlett. Fuck, Scarlett, he's here. He's still here. She looks behind me and her face goes pale. Let's move, she says. Still staying along the back wall. We walk to the right-hand side of the store. He mimics our movements, never taking his eyes off of me. He's stalking you, Scarlett says. Thanks. Needed that. We look for the sales associate again, and she sees what he is doing. She looks over to me and tells us, "Don't leave the store, I'm calling security." I'm relieved and panicked at the same time. I texted my roommate to let him know our location, what was happening. and to make sure he could get to us in case anything escalated. Another 5 minutes went by and the man walked off, looking back every now and then until he disappeared into the crowd. Then the security officer showed up. He looked frail. He appeared to be an elderly man in his 70s. He asked us what was wrong, and we told him. The sales associate was with it, and she confirmed everything, down to what colored clothes he was wearing and the sneakers he had on. The security officer shrugged. "Well, he's gone now. There's nothing I can really do. Let me know if he comes by again." I was shocked, a little hurt and frustrated. The employee who had helped us kept lookout for us as we scurried across the mall to the exit. We sped walk to my vehicle, got in, and locked the doors. Thank you, employee at Claire's, for being awesome and sticking with us and trying to make us feel safe. You went above and beyond your job. When I recounted this story to my boyfriend later that night, we ended up calling the security officer at the mall to complain. We were told that it couldn't be helped. The head of the department tried to tell me that the man was mentally challenged, and that at the time of our incident, he was unescorted by his family. After a couple of months of thinking about this, I'm not entirely sure of the case. Despite any disability he had, he was aware of what he was doing. When you consider the sales associate asking him questions. This was in the middle of the afternoon, in a crowded area, in a well-lit place with a friend. I was not alone. Do not be lulled into a false sense of security as I was. Stay safe, my friends. So, strange man at the mall, let's not meet again. Three. This happened back when our family moved to our new house in 2001. I was 8 years old and my sister was 10. Since we had just moved, my mom really wanted some new furniture to make our new home look nice. We weren't well off in the first place, but it was our first real home, meaning it wasn't a cruddy mobile home for once. We drove to a little value furniture shop that had a bunch of things to choose from. Of course, my sister and I, being typical siblings, were joking around with each other. She called me an ugly freak, and I told her that her face was fat. Just normal things. Unfortunately, my mom couldn't find anything that she liked, so we left empty-handed. When we got into the car, she wanted to go to the grocery store and pick up a few things, so the trip wasn't a total waste. We drove along. My sister and I noticed a brown car following us, turning every corner, making every light, etc. We pointed it out to my mom and she just blew it off. Don't worry about it, guys. So we dropped it too. We were young and we completely forgot about it when we went to the general store and grabbed our snacks. Again, we got in the car and left for home. And again, the brown car started following us. Mom was getting a bit worried since we had lived in another town 20 miles away, since she told us it had to be someone we knew. We had relatives living in the town, just not anyone we were really close to. Like they did before, they copied our route. The closer we were to home, the more paranoid my mother became and, in turn, fueled our fear. She told us to copy the license plate, but tried to assure us that it was probably our cousin Jessica or something. When we parked in our driveway, the car parked behind us, the engine still running. My mom ordered us to stay in the car while she went to talk with our cousin. My sister and I watched from the rear window as my mom went to speak with her. After a few minutes, we heard the woman from the car yelling, gesturing to us inside the car, and then went back to my mother. She peeled out of the driveway, almost running over my mother's feet. A few seconds later, my mom was crying hysterically and ordered us to get into the house. She pushed us into our room and spoke to her dad, even though we could hear everything. Apparently, the woman had thought we were insulting her while we were in the furniture store and threatened us. She had said that she would throw nails in our driveway and poison our dogs outside. She insisted that my mother beat us for talking to a complete stranger in such a way, and if she had the chance, she'd break our little fucking necks if she heard us talking about her again. My dad wasn't very happy that my mom brought her all the way to the house, but stated it probably wasn't a big deal. The next day, my sister and I were walking to our bus stop when we saw the brown car parked across the street from our house. Sis immediately ran back inside to tell her dad, and he walked us to the bus stop and waited until we were safely on the bus. My mom wanted to do something about it, but my dad was against it. He assumed that the police wouldn't do anything since they were just threats. So the creepy, stalkerish behavior continued without interference. She began showing up every morning, watching us as we waited for the bus. But she was coming onto our property to make her presence known. My mom found a bottle of antifreeze near the dog's fenced-in area. It hadn't been opened, but we were told to bring in their bowls every night just in case. Food wrappers and half-empty cups of soda were thrown on our lawn. The air valve caps and lug nuts on our tires went missing. One of our outside cats died, but we couldn't pinpoint what happened. Then my older brother did something really stupid. My dad was tired of walking us to the bus stop, so he asked my older brother to do it. Spotting the car in its typical spot, he decided the smart thing to do was just throw up his middle finger at her. This fucked her up. She ran out of her car, cursing and yelling at us. She said we were crazy and needed to fucking learn our place as children. She was screaming and threatening to beat us and spitting at us. I was bawling my eyes out and my brother had to pick me up because I just couldn't move. We stayed home that day and my mom finally called the police. We gave them her license plate number and they said they would visit her in a day or two. My mom didn't tell me much, but when they confronted her about it, she went on a total rant about how kids are just dirty bastards and she'd kill every last one she could. They didn't arrest her, but a few days later the police called my mom to inform us that the lady was admitted to a psych ward. There were no more details unless my mom didn't want to share them, but we never heard from her again. Edit. Okay. To the people wondering why my mom drove all the way back to our house instead of the police station. My mom was kind of an airhead. She wasn't 100% sure who it was, even though she suspected it was my cousin. She just didn't consider that it could be someone with ill intentions, I guess. I'm not on good terms with her now since she's become a recluse, so I'm just wildly guessing based on her past experiences. My dad did let her know it was a really stupid idea later on, but that was the end of it. Luckily, nothing like that happened again.